All right. Can you believe it? Here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome to you, whoever you are. Whether you're a new listener or a returning friend, I do so appreciate that you're choosing to listen to this. I'm feeling a little bit stunned by the passage of time because this year of 2024 is winding down already. It's Thanksgiving here in the USA this week. And you know, once that happens, it's a quick stumble to the end of the year. And I'm shocked. I'm shocked by how quickly this year has gone by. And I also just finished classes today, and it marks the end of 8 weeks of the center being open. So 2 months is what I'm calling it. 8 weeks exactly today. And I'm happy to report that the second month, I did even better than the first month. So it's a good trajectory. I'm happy about that. We will have to see because this next month is December, and traditionally that month tends to be a little bit of a down month because everybody's got so much going on. But then January is the New Year's resolution month. I don't know if that still holds true, but when I had the center in Brooklyn, it was always the case. And then at some point, all the gyms and the centers, they would all do the special New Year's resolution promotions, which I even remember writing a blog post saying that I wasn't going to do it. I'm not going to promote this. But I'm wondering if there will be that kind of seasonal ebb and flow of attendance. We'll have to see. More importantly, I'd say the people who have been coming, some of them have started to become regulars, like people who are coming again and again. And as I was saying last week, it's been so interesting to observe the subtle process of someone utilizing yoga practice to see if they can feel better. And that is a very specific directive or purpose. And those of you who've listened to the show for a while know that I have a gentle is the new advanced kind of idea about practice. And I was very concerned about that. I was talking about it here on this show as I was getting ready to open. If you remember, well, will people be interested in that? Will enough people want that? Do people still want to just sweat and work out? And there are still lots of people, that's what they want. But there's a really big difference between a yoga practice that is specifically about wanting to address someone's pain and suffering and their sense of self and how they feel about being alive and someone who's maybe not concerning themselves with that directly and focusing on other things and, you know, providing cardio and interesting kind of experiences and even very good stuff for your body. I'm not saying other types of approaches might not be healthy and good. I'm saying it's just not the focus of that class or that teacher that we're going to directly utilize this practice to address our pains and difficulties. It's more indirect, like hopefully this does a good thing for you in the overall scheme of you trying to address your well-being. But for most people who've been coming into the center, it seems like they're coming because they have some kind of pain or difficulty. And they're not necessarily admitting that when they're walking in the door. It seems like there's a subtle process of someone coming to admit that the reason they came to yoga class is because they've got back pain, or maybe they've got some internal anxiety or strife. There lots of worry or, you know, general anxiety inside ourselves with our lives. And when they're trying to think of what can I do for that, yoga is on the table. Also, I'd say a good population of the people coming in are a little bit older, 60s, 70s, even some folks in their 80s. And they're just looking for a healthy activity, a way to move, be in their bodies, and ultimately to hopefully feel better. So offering someone a practice that is helpful in addressing their pain and suffering, in my experience, is a lot about observing patterns and inviting people to observe their own patterns. It's not like I'm observing the pattern in them and then, oh, now I know what to do for them. It's more like providing an example of how one could explore their own experience of their breath and their body to become more aware of where their pains are coming from. And recently that's happened more, where several students have showed up. They were the only one. It was just one-to-one. And they took that as an opportunity to share with me and engage with me in an interpersonal way and share with me the connections that they're making between what they're experiencing in practice and how it connects to other things in their lives or things that have happened in their past, or like they're identifying different connections. They're connecting dots beyond just what we're doing on the mat, but related to the experience they're having on the mat that's helping them feel like they have more clarity, or helping them make a better choice, or helping them feel better. And that's what I have been calling in my mind a pain pattern. Like a pain pattern, it's a pattern that you have that's not just mechanical. Like it might be biomechanical in how you move your body, but it's also much bigger than that. It's multi-dimensional in terms of all the factors that are playing into why you're having that pain. And undoing that requires having a sense of this bigger picture. So I've been doing that every day now for the last 2 months, people coming, and it just so happened that I got this email a little while ago from Rick Olderman, my guest today. Rick was here 2 years ago. Longtime listeners, you might remember, it was when I was dealing with my hip and I was talking to a lot of different people and going to physical therapy and getting an MRI. And Rick came on the show and he gave me some really interesting ideas that were super helpful. And now here we are 2 years later, and Rick's got a book coming out, and the book is called Pain Patterns: Why You're in Pain and How to Stop It. And he has a very cool and interesting way of articulating what he has discovered is behind this idea of pain patterns and how we might address them. Super interesting. I was very glad to reconnect with him, and I'm very happy to be sharing it with you today. Real quick before we get to it, let me mention that if you are enjoying the show and you would like to connect with me in other ways, then there are opportunities for us to do that. I have ongoing live classes online. I've got a weekly discussion group. There's on-demand continuing education videos. Or perhaps you would like to become a supporter and get access to the full-length archives with a podcast premium subscription. All of my stuff can be found at jbrownyoga.com. All right, y'all. I think we will leave it there. I will touch base with you on the other side, but let's go ahead and get to it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Rick Olderman. Hello?
Hello, Jay.
Rick.
Nice to hear you.
How are you, sir? You want to turn the cameras on? We can turn them on if you would like them on.
Yeah.
I'm cool with them on.
Oh,
People are more used to it nowadays. I've said this many times before that I just sometimes these days I don't want people to feel like they have to look good for the camera.
Yeah, well, that would be impossible, and so I'm good with whatever I've got.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and well, Jay, will this be a video then, or is it just going to be audio?
It's just going to be audio.
I'll tell you what, it might be better if we have the video on, because usually I use my little skeleton here.
Yeah, I know. I remember
things.
last time. That's why. So I had just done it on. Let's put them on. So for that reason.
So if I, am saying something that you think isn't going to translate audio wise, you can,
Yeah.
I'm just so used to demonstrating.
Go ahead. Put it on. I've got mine on. Put yours on.
Okay. Is my video isn't? Oh, okay. Got it.
There you are.
You got me? Okay. Great.
I got you.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Rick. And I'm already recording. I don't know if you remember. We've begun. Okay. I don't want that to be a surprise or anything.
No problem.
Very cool. Well, listen, I was just checking, as I do when someone's a repeat guest on the show, when was the last time you were here? And I was stunned to discover that it was exactly 2 years ago, November 2022.
Oh, wow.
Doesn't seem like that long ago, but it was 2 years ago, believe it or not.
Oh, there must be something synchronous about this then.
There is, in a way. And even that, because you had actually emailed me a little while back and it got lost in the mix because I've been crazy with stuff going on. I opened this place and all kinds of stuff's going on. So the delay is even more synchronous in a sense. But just to kind of refresh our memory and anybody who's listening's memory, in November 2022, you came on. We talked about an approach you were taking was more of a systems approach to addressing pain. We talked about some of the limitations to like a straight physical therapy education. And interestingly enough, when we spoke, I was kind of in the midst of working with the physical therapist, I recall, about my hip, but I hadn't gotten the MRI yet. And I did get the MRI afterwards. And what's interesting about that is the results of the MRI was what I had thought it was, but it confirmed that I had labral tears. And, but they didn't really have any way to address that because my hip was really healthy. Like my hip joint was such that I wasn't really a candidate for a hip replacement. And we wouldn't want to do that because my hip was pretty good. So it was these maybe labral tears and maybe other things, which we can get into. But what I'm mentioning that is because you were someone very significant, because we just talked about having the cameras on. If you recall, you had me step back and walk around the room and you did like a quick assessment. And you were the first person to say anything along these lines. You said right anterior femoral glide syndrome. And you pointed out that I was locking my knees when I was walking as well.
Yes.
And I didn't do all the things. I explored some of the things that you had suggested. I didn't do like the taping. You had suggested some taping and some things that I didn't do. But the significant part is that idea of how my thigh bone was moving in my hip.
Correct.
Absolutely became hugely significant and has kind of been sort of the main, if I would call it, technical thing that I've worked with since. That's made a huge difference. Like I'm happy to say I'm not having the same flare-ups I was having before I got the MRI. However, I would say that, and it brings us to our conversation now, as I have times gone on and I am doing better with it, I still have little flares here and there, but not like before. I've identified that it isn't just like a technical thing. It isn't just a technical thing about how my thigh bone is moving. There's more to it than that.
Exactly.
And I remember last time we spoke, you mentioned Hannah's somatics, and we were talking about how you can't think certain things, you got to feel certain things. And then recently, not that recently, but a little while back, I had this expression in my head that it wasn't movement patterns, but pain patterns. And that's why when I got the email from you, you've got some new book out 2 years later called Pain Patterns. I was like, wait a second. Let me talk to Rick again. So I'm great to have you back, Rick. That's the story that brings us back together again. How have you been?
I've been great. And Jay, it makes me so happy to hear you explain that because, this information is meant to not only be listened to and thought about, you've got to practice it. And you discovering these things in your body is helping you see potential sources of pain patterns that are occurring in you. So this is what I always encourage people, because so many people just listen to these podcasts. I always try to include a test or two so that people can diagnose themselves a little bit and understand, really feel what's happening in their body that's causing their pain. And so I'm very happy to be here. I love to hear that you've been thinking about the information, and it's been meaningful.
Again, it was just something you pointed to. I just had a conversation that was on the show this week, as a matter of fact, with a woman named Susie Haitley, and she was saying a similar thing, that people who are out there working with people and trying to help people with chronic pain and studying all kinds of different things to kind of help have information sources to work with and help them in that, seem to arrive at some of the similar things that you are articulating in a very clear way, even from like the bullet points I got to see. I haven't gotten a chance to read your new book, but I think it's still coming out, right? It hasn't come out yet, has it?
It was just published on Friday.
So, perfect timing. Good. Yeah, I didn't realize.
I haven't even received, this is a proof copy I have. I don't even have my own copy yet.
Okay. Well, just for the record, I haven't had a chance to read it, but I got a few bullet points about kind of some of the things in there. And like I said, there is these synchronicitous things. The conversation around chronic pain has just come up again on the show. I've been off on other tangents and talk about God and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
But I kind of have been coming back to some of this idea of addressing pain. And also, just to mention, part of it is I did open this yoga center 7 weeks ago. So for the first time in quite a while, I just have people who are just coming in, most of them like in their 60s and 70s, who are coming in to kind of see if yoga practice will help them with their pain. And I've kind of put it out there, like the marketing for this center is very specific in terms of its approach and what it's for. So it's attracting those kinds of people.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of witnessing what I was calling last week, what is a very subtle, nuanced process that people go through when they have kind of breakthroughs along these things. So I'm always looking for more ways of articulating this. And it seems like that's kind of what you've been doing in this new book. The first thing I noticed about it, and I guess, well, even before we get to that, let me just ask you about the title. How did you get to the idea of a pain pattern rather than a movement pattern? Where does that come from for you?
Because in the book, I address not only movement, but also fascia and neurological reflex patterns. And there is a significant overlap between these three areas of research in movement sciences, but none of them are talking to each other. And so I've been integrating these three ideas into my practice for the last 20 plus years. This is why I see the results I see, is because I'm able to think on these three levels of integration. And so I've created these home programs to help people solve their pain. And, I've talked to a lot of people about this and taught this approach to other physical therapists, but this is the first time I've put it all together in writing. And I've created new medical illustrations to show these relationships. And we can go deeper into that if you want. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I realized that there are patterns. These are patterns of dysfunction. There are only 3 of them that almost all people with any kind of spinal pain fall into. And so once you understand your pattern, you can then understand how the other deficits you have might be feeding that pattern. But first, understanding the pattern that you have in your body that's causing your pain will help you remove the veil of, why is this happening to me? Why would my ankle be feeding my sciatic pain? Or whatever. Why would locking my knees be feeding my back pain? Things like that. Knowing the pattern that you have, or patterns, and again, there's only 3, really helps you kind of make this a simpler process to solving your pain. And by the way, before I get off on a tangent, I'm very excited for your opening your new center, Jay. And at some point in this conversation, I want to wind it back to yoga, right?
We will.
There are 3 tests that I wish almost every yoga, Pilates, or other movement-based practitioner would do with their audience prior to their session, so that they understand some of the things that are feeding their pain right off the bat. And then they can modify their yoga or Pilates or other practice based on the results of these tests.
Okay, wait, we'll get to the 3 tests for all the teachers. I like that. I took a note. We will definitely get back to that. Sure. But you also And I want to talk about fascia and the other thing you mentioned too, but you did just say there's only three patterns. Now, when I talked about pain patterns, I was thinking of that as like a very individual thing that couldn't be boiled down to just three. So I'm curious what you mean when you say there's only three. You clearly have named them. What have you named them?
Yeah, extension, flexion, and side bending patterns.
Okay.
All right?
So you've based it on biomechanics essentially, right? Like
biomechanics, fascia, and neurological reflexes.
Okay, so you said flexion, extension, and side bending.
Mm-hmm.
I see. Okay, so when you say that all of our pain boils down to one of those three patterns,
one or two,
can you explain that more clearly how that works?
Sure. So you're excited about the movement aspect of this, right?
Yeah.
So, and we talked about this last time, and let's bring up just one of those three patterns, an extension pattern. All right. This is the most common cause of most back pain, sciatic pain, SI joint pain out there. All right. And what it simply means, Jay, is that extension means arching of the spine. So by an extension pattern, it means that you have a problem with too much arching of your spine. Some people will call that lordosis. Some people will call that sway back, although that's a little bit more complicated. That's more of a hybrid. But anyway, that's what an extension pattern means, is that the way you're moving and your fascial constrictions and perhaps some neurodynamic issues are all feeding the presence of this pattern in you. But identifying that you have an extension pattern, and we can go over the simple test. It takes 60 seconds to figure out whether you do. So once you identify that, my back pain is due to my back being too arched, that helps you clue in that anytime that you can then review like, I have pain when I'm brushing my teeth at the sink. I just learned that my back is arching too much. I wonder if I flex my back more when I'm brushing my teeth, if that would make my pain go away. Lo and behold, it does. Mm-hmm. So that's the value of understanding which patterns you have, is that you can start to filter, because our brain doesn't know how to filter pain signals. It doesn't understand what is causing the pain. It's just registering that you have the pain.
And the source, I just talked about this on This Week. Sorry to interrupt you, but the idea is that the pain, where you feel the pain, isn't always the source of the pain.
Absolutely. And we can go into that. So that's another part of what I talk about in this book, is something called functional linking. And what that means is that there are links to older problems you have elsewhere in your body that link to the pattern that is causing your pain. And so I give examples of that in the book and how that is. And the tests that I have in the book, other than deciding what the three patterns are you have, I also test your body through the primary functional links that are causing most people's pain.
Is that like you mean like a compensatory pattern where like? Correct. Yeah.
So one person's, let's say you have plantar fasciitis, right? And that causes, and there's we can go deep into plantar fasciitis if you want to, but there are different ways that plantar fasciitis can wind through your body to cause the pattern of pain that's created in you. Mm. Sometimes that plantar fasciitis will cause, let's say it's left plantar fasciitis. Sometimes that will contribute to the left-sided sciatica or left-sided back pain or left-sided SI joint pain. But it could very easily also contribute to right-sided back pain or right-sided sciatica or right-sided SI joint pain. It just depends on how your brain has decided to negotiate that issue, partly due to your exercise habits, your work habits, your genetics, all sorts of things.
Well, I mean, just to emphasize the point that you just made about these three patterns of dysfunction, pain. I don't know if those aren't the pain patterns, but those three patterns that you're talking about.
Yeah.
For me personally, I definitely had an extension pattern, not in my low back, but like at a different part of my back, from all this stuff I learned in yoga about axial extension and kind of like sitting upright and kind of like having my ribs out and like kind of holding my body in this way that I thought was optimal, that I'd kind of like trained my way into. I kind of like overcooked shoulders up and back and like all this stuff, letting my spine feels to me like rounding forward, but actually it's just letting it be in its natural curves, has been pretty big in terms of addressing those pains, you know.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Jay, because that's one of the biggest, I think, errors in postural training. And it happens a lot in, yoga, dance, Pilates, gymnastics, and a lot of like ergonomic classes. Everyone's always talking about being military erect, lift, all this kind of stuff. Well, if you have an extension problem, that's exactly the opposite way that you should be functioning. Yeah. Plus, that pattern also leads to chronic neck pain and migraines and headaches too.
It has led to like chronic pains. I think I'm also one of the other things it's not like a formal diagnosis, but I do think I'm a very strong candidate for like, what do they call it? Hypermobility syndrome stuff.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Like my connective tissues are real lax and they take way more long to recover than like some other people's I know,
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up because there's a really interesting phenomenon that I've noticed, at people who are flexible like you, tend to believe that flexibility will solve their pain. They need more flexibility. And people who are strong and like, really built, lift a lot of weights, feel that strengthening is the thing that they need more of to solve their pain. Mm-hmm. And so flexible people often develop like hypermobility issues like you did, but yet they're stretching to try to solve their pain, which is exacerbating the exact problem, right? And so on. So the flexible people need a little bit more strengthening perhaps, and the strong people need a little bit more flexibility perhaps.
Yeah, I've certainly found that. Some goblet squats have been important for me, in ways that they weren't at other times in my life. But I guess I'm curious, one of the things you mentioned earlier, you mentioned two things. You mentioned fascia and then neuro something. I didn't catch the last part of it. Let's talk about the fascia part first. I know that's a big component of the new book. You talk about the connection between movement, fascia, and reflexes, and pain. So fascia is a big area of conversation. I know it's like only recently they've been talking about it in new ways. Like it wasn't even in the anatomy books not that long ago. And now they're talking about it like an organ. So what's your take on fascia? How do you think it's playing into people's pain patterns?
Yeah. So let's really we'll take a macro view of this and just keep it really simple.
Okay.
So, I just talked about extension problems, right? And that is when your spine is too arched. Typically, from a movement standpoint, these kind of people tend to keep their back arched when they're bending forward and doing deadlifts, that kind of arched back kind of look, or when they're standing at the kitchen sink, their feet are in parallel, they're bending forward from their hips, and so their back is always arched. And so that is a movement pattern that's perpetuating their extension problem. All right. Now, this is also reinforced by fascia, because there are super highways of fascia that run through our body, that run from our head to our toes. One of those lines, these were discovered by Thomas Myers, who's a fascial researcher. All right. He identified several of these superhighways. One of them is the superficial back line. Well, the superficial back line goes from the top of your head all the way to the bottoms of your feet, along the entire back and the back of your legs. So you can see then, if you imagined that the fascia along this whole backside of the skeleton, right, is contracted, it's going to promote extension problems. And if you try to move out of those extension problems, but your fascia is excessively contracted, then it's going to be difficult to move out of that. So that's the fascia element of this. And so just to round this out, there's a superficial front line, there's a deep front line, there's a lateral line, there's a spiral line. They all contribute to these pain patterns. So from a reflex standpoint, neurological reflexes, we're born with these deep neurological reflexes that help us, let's say when we crawl, to lift our head up, our back muscles and neck muscles have to contract. Those same muscles are part of that entire fascial pattern that I just described. And that's part of that whole extension problem movement issue that we talked about a second ago too. So this reflex pattern is called a Landau reflex. We're born with it. we're also born with a couple other reflexes, one called a startle reflex, and the other is called a cross extensor reflex too. And we can go into all of those if you want to. But basically, keeping it on the extension problem, this is how I've blended the movement, fascia, and neurological reflex patterns that we have in us and we're born with, and how that translates into chronic pain is that if you have an extension problem, then you are likely activating that fascial line excessively too. And you're more tapped into that lambda reflex pattern, which is also tied to, let's say, anxiety, stress, things like that. Because when we're anxious, we come upright, right, to see what's going on. And so it activates that whole line of muscles from a neurological standpoint, a deep neurological reflex pattern too. So after we get done, walking and learning how to lift our head and all that and be upright, these reflexes kind of melt into the background and are kind of overwritten by our choices for movement, sports, all that kind of stuff. But we never lose the reflex patterns. That's hardwired into our bodies. So these reflex patterns emerge during certain situations, like I just imagined. If you're in a scary situation, you need to be alert to see what's going on, right? Or someone slaps their hands behind you and you do a startle, right? Or you step on a nail and you try and get your foot off that nail. That's the cross extensor reflex pattern. This is what helps you survive your environment. So they never leave us. They just melt into the background a little bit, but they're still acting on us. Does that make sense, Jay?
It does. I mean, I really like the way that you're framing this around these neurological reflexes. Because I'm often saying, like, we're moving in a slower, more deliberate way because we're looking to kind of see if we can get to our nervous systems more. But what you're talking about in terms of these neurological reflexes, that those are baked in things that our bodies have in order to survive, as you're saying, or they're just like part of our makeup. However, I guess it's interesting the way that some of those neurological reflexes happen in circumstances where, like, we put ourselves in life situations where we don't have to ever lift things or go out of our apartments if we don't want to or whatever. Thus the need for practices or to do things, like give yourself things to do, like go to a yoga class or go for a walk or whatever it is, because we've removed ourselves in life from certain contexts and situations where our bodies would be thriving with those neurological reflexes happening. Would you say that that's true, that some of it is kind of like environmental stuff that we're kind of up against?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, the reflexes are triggered. I mean, the overt expression of the reflexes are triggered by the environment. However, if you have an extension problem and you're continually bending over with your arched back all the time, this is part of your brain feeding that reflex pattern and fascial pattern and movement pattern all the time. So regardless of, even if your environment doesn't have all of these startle patterns and anxious issues, if your movement pattern is such that you're always integrating this arched spine in whatever you do, then that's part of that. It's like light being both a particle and a wave, right? Your whole soma, or the way you are, integrates all three of these elements, no matter, what proportion it is or which one is more, out in front and dominant. You can't move and not have a reflex pattern, right? Because that is our neurological system, right? It is a foundational principle of how we move. And so you can retrain that, though. And so I talk about that in the book. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we're talking about doing is retraining some of these dysfunctions in our patternings. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. It's much simpler. I mean, first of all, you identify the three patterns that you have, which of the three patterns you have. And then I take you through, I think it's about 8 or 10 functional tests to see what older problems you might be having that your brain is compensating for, that is feeding those three patterns, right? And then the next part of the book, I talk about the existence of stress, anxiety, and so forth in your body that may be triggering. Okay, I'm about to go in the weeds with something here.
Go for it.
Something called myofibroblasts, which are part of fascia. All right. And this
We've
is also
heard about fibroblasts before, just to say, because my friend who was into yin was talking about the knee and talking about how stressing the knees and the fibroblasts. I have heard something about fibroblasts before. So how do they apply in this instance?
Oh, okay. So since you're interested,
just because we might lose a few people for a minute, but there's a couple people out there who are going to be psyched. So go for it.
So I think even the people that aren't geared towards anatomy and medical terms, I'm going to make this simple so you understand. So please don't leave. This is an important
We're going to bring
idea.
it back down to earth. We promise.
All right. So a fibroblast is a fascial cell. Okay. Myofibroblasts are cells that actively contract. Myo means muscle. Mm-hmm. All right. So there are these myofibroblasts that are laid down in our bodies. Why are those laid down? They're laid down in areas of mechanical stress in our bodies. So for instance, if go back to that extension problem pattern, if we're constantly bending like this and hinging at our hips and causing our L5-S1, joint to do most of the work, well, then our body is going to lay down myofibroblasts in that stressed area to help protect it. It shores it up. All right. Mm-hmm. Now here's the interesting thing about myofibroblasts. Don't leave us, folks. All right. So
no, I'm interested. I want to know. Go. Okay. Continue.
So muscles contract because our brain tells them to. We have nerves from our brain to our muscle that says, bend that elbow. We bend the elbow. The brain says, relax that muscle now, and our elbow straightens. Myofibroblasts do not respond to neural input, though. They respond to a hormone-like molecule called a cytokine. This cytokine is called transforming growth factor beta 1. And so transforming growth factor beta 1 is released into our blood system in times of stress and anxiety. So if we have myofibroblasts laid down in a mechanically stressed area of our body, and we are under stress or anxious a lot, well, that causes the stress alone causes the myofibroblasts to contract. Myofibroblasts are typically laid down in our thoracolumbar fascia in our low back area. That's one of the areas of our body that it can be laid out. But if you have other mechanical stress areas of your body, myofibroblasts may be laid down there as well. And so when we are stressed, it causes these myofibroblasts to contract. So here's the interesting thing. When our brain tells a muscle to contract, and then the brain says, relax that muscle, it contracts and then it relaxes. But when myofibroblasts are activated, it is a slower ramp up because it's a chemical based or hormone-like based, response. And therefore also the tail is much longer too. If you even have a tail of that contraction, because if you're a chronically stressed or anxious person, that will cause a constant release of these cytokines to activate your myofibroblasts to cause chronic tension in your back. Myofibroblasts have up to 6 times the contractile capacity of regular fibroblasts. So this is another layer. So even if you tell your brain, your muscles, hey, muscles, I'm going to shut you down for the day, myofibroblasts may say, no, I'm listening to something else in your body, right? I'm listening to your sympathetic nervous system. And your sympathetic nervous system says, no, you can't relax yet. And so it's going to stay turned on. Does this make sense, Jay?
It makes huge sense because I have what I think you're describing, myofibroblasts, in the area that you just pointed to on your back.
Everyone does, Jay, because the back is mechanically a stress system just by its architecture.
Now, what I would say is I've observed, because I do pay a lot of attention to my body just because of what I'm doing, and I maybe more than other people do, and do different things with my body and kind of do science experiments and my own somatic experiencing of stuff. And I have definitely observed that there are times when those myofibroblasts you're talking about flare up in the way that you're describing, as they kind of it comes in a slow way. It's not like a quick, all of a sudden, it kind of builds over time. And if I notice it early enough and I rest enough and I do enough recovery, I can fend it off before it gets to a certain place. But if I've got too much to do and I don't have the leisure or whatever, the space, I've got 2 young kids, I don't always have the time and space to do what my body's telling me it needs, honestly.
Yes.
And I can feel it'll ramp up. And if it gets too far, then it takes way longer. Like you're saying, it'll have like a big tail to it.
Right.
And some of the things that make it set off, and this is what really stuck with me with what you just said, it's not always like I did something physically.
Correct.
That it is a parasympathetic nervous system thing, and like my state of mind and my feeling of stress, like my feeling of being able to meet the demands that are on me, which is what you're saying in terms of like fight or flight. And
yes. So this is, I think this is, if not the pathway, this is a pathway by which psychological issues manifest as pain in our body. And so we all talk about, you can listen to 1,000 podcasts about the mind-body connection. They're all talking about, the mind and body are connected. But no one talks about what that connection is. How is it connected? And I believe this is the pathway by which, or a pathway, there are probably many, knowing how intricate the body is, but this is a pathway by which psychological issues become manifest in the body as pain. And of course, there's tons of books about cure your mind and cure your back pain, right?
Right.
Well, this is how you're doing that. And so some people's back pain may be 100% mental, right? But some people's back pain may be 50% mechanical and 50% mental, or 100% mechanical. And so my book takes you through a way to try and figure this out for you. And so you can start fixing the things that are actually causing your pain instead of throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks, Well,
I think that's very interesting. And I guess what I would say though is that what I'm most intrigued by is like that does offer a very interesting and maybe seemingly accurate way to explain, like you're saying, how the psychosocial becomes the bio or whatever.
Sure.
That pathway of like what's happening in my mind and my stress and my emotional reality, let's throw that in there, how that's coming through into my biological system by way of these myofibroblasts being laid down at places where I call them the weak points, where you have your weak points.
Stress points.
The stress points, exactly. That's sort of what the body does naturally. It sets those down and those become the sites of like flare up, depending on the state that you're in or how well you're managing your state.
The sports you've played, your genetics, your work, your exercise patterns, all sorts of things. So, and while for those of you who are like feeling like, this is way over my head kind of stuff, you don't need to know this information in order to solve your pain.
Well, that's the thing, because what are you figuring out what sets off those myofibroblasts and how to address it is a whole other question, right?
Yes. And so I take you through exercises to try and figure out how much, how much of this is coming from your brain and how much is coming from your body. And if it's coming from your body, what are the potential stressors that are creating those patterns? So at the end, the book is broken up into 2 sections. The first is kind of what you and I are talking about right now. We're talking about, the technical stuff of how the body's put together, the architecture that creates these patterns of pain. But the second half, it's actually more like, 3/5 is the testing. So the book is functioning as a workbook too, so that not only will you learn about how your body is built that's causing chronic pain, but you get to test what those causes are. And then you further get to try and figure out, well, how much of this is coming from my mind and how much of this is coming from my body? And we haven't even talked about dietary sources of potential.
Well, actually, I'm curious to ask you about that. Let's put a pin in the dietary sources. First, I am curious about, you're describing like, some of the roots of these pain patterns can be mechanical. Like we could be moving in ways like you were pointing. I'm locking my knees and I was moving my femur bone in my hip socket in a way that was aggravating those labral tears. And I could find another way to move it. So there are like mechanical things that we can look at. Is that what the testing is about initially, to sort of like find what sort of mechanical things might be at play that are helping?
Absolutely. Because our brains are so good. So our brains are wired for success. Our brains are not wired for how we achieve success. So if you have like a knee problem, but you need to run a mile, your brain is going to figure out a way for you to run that mile. It's not concerned with the long-term aspect of that, of those compensations are. It's just trying to get this short-term, I've got to get from A to B right now, and I've got to figure out a way to do that. And what happens is, once you keep doing those kinds of things, your brain then learns, oh, this is my preferred neural pathway for this behavior. And so it sets up these compensation patterns to feel normal, right? So the fact that you're moving normally doesn't mean that you're moving well. It just means that you're moving normally based on how you've taught your brain to identify normal and abnormal. So this is an important idea, that because if you have chronic pain, there's usually going to be at least one habit, something that you're doing that's contributing to your chronic pain. And so when you try and change that habit, your brain is going to say, whoa, 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 this isn't how we do things. And all of these alarm bells are going to be going off, right? Saying, no, this isn't what we did. This is not what we agreed on. And so it's going to start sending out like frustration, anger. It's going to start triggering emotional responses to these changes too, because it doesn't understand yet that the new way of doing something is a pain-free way of doing something. It just is recognizing that it's different. That's all it cares about, because that's what you've taught it to care about.
Is that what you're describing? Is that what you meant when you were talking about this functional linking?
Yes. So that comes into play with functional linking, because these compensations, let's go back to our plantar fasciitis example. If your brain has figured out how to compensate, and so that you can do whatever it is, your yoga, exercise, running marathons, whatever it is. And then we say, oh, well, the problem here is in your foot, and you've got to walk this way, like unlocking your knees, like you mentioned at the very beginning of the show, right? Your brain's going to say, no, man, I don't like this at all. This isn't what you've taught me to do. So functional linking and this habit correction stuff and your brain's response to all of that, you have to be aware of this, that you've got to like not pay attention to your brain when you're trying to change your habits, because your brain isn't leading you down the right path. It's just leading you down the old path.
It is a very subtle thing that you're describing. And to be frank, the thing that helped me most, and I might have mentioned this to you last time we spoke, is, I did initially play with toe spacers because I had like a bunion thing happening. And then I switched to these like barefoot style shoes that are wider and flatter and thinner, like more ground feel. And the reason that helped me is because I could feel how hard my heel was smacking against the ground when I was walking, when I was wearing them. So in order to walk without it hurting, without banging my foot into the floor, I had to change my gait and change my walk, place my foot different, take smaller steps, all these things that it just forced me to have to change the way I was moving in a way that I wasn't able to previously, just thinking it. Like, oh, move more like this, or don't lock your knees, or whatever it was. There had to be a way to kind of get me to feel into it, which is what you're talking about, and what some of the stuff that you're pointing to is that you got to kind of change these patterns through a somatic reconditioning kind of way.
Yeah. So Jay, why did you need to do less heel strike? How was that connected to your pain?
Good question. Because when my heel would hit, I would feel it chain up. I would feel the impact in my heel, and I would feel it run up my leg into my hip, and then up into places in my back where my myofibroblasts get all activated and stuff. And so I was just identifying the pattern, the pain pattern in me just walking wherever I was going.
And that the way that I was walking was, I guess, partly because of these shoes where you can't feel anything. I just had conditioned myself to walk in a certain way. And it's funny, my daughter, she's like, you don't walk the same anymore. You used to have this bounce that you don't have anymore. And so to answer your question, because I didn't want to have pain and hitting my heel so hard on the ground was causing pain.
Can I explain it to you from a functional linking standpoint?
Please do.
All right. So we believe that you have an anterior femoral glide syndrome, which means that the femur head is gliding forward in your hip socket uncontrollably, which then, because of that, it's like a washing machine that's out of whack.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of Jay Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.